Let's now think about negative profits. This is possible, okay? I want you to get it out of your head that profits are always profitable. They don't have to be. Monopolies can be producing a product no one wants, or maybe they don't do a very good job of producing it. Maybe that they're not minimizing their costs properly. So there's lots of reasons why a monopoly might not be profitable. And you can probably guess what this is going to look like. Demand looks the same as in the past. Marginal revenue, twice as steep, if you can draw it roughly appropriately there. Marginal cost looks like that. And we can find our quantity and thus our price. So everything about this is the same so far. What do I need to add to this to show negative profits, do you think? Keep in mind, this formula right here is going to be very useful to you. Same formula we just used, we're going to use it again. To have negative profits, you would need average cost to be above the price. Okay? So average cost would need to look something like this. Average total cost. Okay? So with that average total cost, let's switch my colors here a little bit. With that average total cost, you can now imagine that this firm would be earning negative profits. Every item it produces costs more than what they can sell it for. And so this area in here, that rectangle, would be the negative profits or losses. So even though this firm is a monopoly, even though they're the only ones able to produce this product for whatever reason, they're still not profitable. You know, have you ever seen a small town and there's one store and the store shuts down? Happens all the time. Well, that is a monopoly that is earning negative profits and thus shuts down. Will they shut down in the short run or long run? Well, it depends. In the long run, I guess they're always going to shut down, right? Negative profits always a bad thing. But in the short run, we would need to know about their average variable cost to figure out what they're going to do. I'm not going to test you on that so much because you've already seen it. I may put in some numbers to think about that type of decision, but I'm not going to make you graph it again, okay, with the average variable cost. We did that with perfectly competitive markets. Okay, so moving on here sort of to the next step. If this was our class right now, that would be the end of the class. We will have done, that material. So this is sort of like starting a new idea. We're covering an entire week here in today's video, so it's going to be a little bit longer than a normal class, most likely. We're going to take this now to 24-3 in the book. And in 24-3, they compare perfect competition with monopolies. And what's key about this is we need to think about, is there a potential role for the government to get involved in markets that are operating like a monopoly? The government can choose whether or not firms are allowed to operate. And you could certainly make a case that maybe Sodexo should not be the only producer at Georgia College. Maybe we should let other firms come in and produce products. You can imagine some of the effects. If Georgia College said anyone can produce, I bet we'd have more competition and probably lower prices. And they could choose to do that, okay? So we're going to compare the two. And for that, I'm going to borrow a graph. Really, this is straight out of the book to think about comparing perfect competition versus monopolies. Here's a couple of notes to recognize. For perfect competition, the price is equal to the marginal revenue. Okay? So every time they sell a new unit, they're going to earn the same revenue, marginal revenue, over and over again. Recalling back to something I said before, if I can sell a product for $1, I can always sell it for $1 in perfectly competitive markets. So every unit I sell has the same marginal revenue. So the price is the marginal revenue. The price is also the marginal cost. So marginal revenue, marginal cost, and price are all the same. All right? This breaks down though, however, for monopolies. For a monopoly, the price is always higher than the marginal cost, and even though the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue, the price is always higher than those values, okay? And so when you graph these, you'll see that this has to be the case. I would really recommend reading the book because they do a good job of explaining sort of some of the repercussions here, and I'm going to do my best to basically replicate what the book is doing in this part of the chapter. So let's compare a couple of different graphs here, and we're going to basically take a perfectly competitive market and a monopoly and kind of lump them together. And for this one example, let's imagine that marginal cost is flat. All right, this is possible. It's possible that this could occur. This means that every time you produce a good, it has the same marginal cost every single time. And that'll just help things be kind of simple for us. And let's compare what a monopoly faces versus what a perfectly competitive firm faces. Okay? So first of all, let's think about what a perfectly competitive firm would do. For a perfectly competitive firm, well, this marginal revenue curve actually wouldn't exist. All right? You don't have to erase this because it's going to show back up here in a bit. But for a perfectly competitive firm, the marginal revenue curve would be equal to this demand curve. Okay? So demand would equal marginal revenue. All right? That's kind of what you would see up here for the firm. All right? And the quantity the firm would choose would be right here, and here would be their price. Okay? Where supply, which is basically marginal cost, hits demand, that tells us the quantity, and it also tells us the price. That's kind of what we're getting into right here. All right? However, for that monopoly, as we've seen before, they face a marginal revenue curve that looks like that. And for the monopoly, what they're going to choose to do is produce a lower quantity and charge a higher price. So here is really the key distinction to recognize about monopolies. Monopolies that are operating rationally will restrict quantity in order to charge a higher price. Monopolies will restrict quantity in order to charge a higher price. And I kind of flew through this little graph here because I'm not going to test you on this graph, but I wanted you to sort of think about the difference between a perfectly competitive firm and a monopoly in terms of the choices that they make. Again, for the perfectly competitive firm, where demand hits marginal cost, that will be their quantity, and that will be their price. But for a monopoly, when they raise the price, they have to reduce quantity. And when they lower the price, they're able to raise quantity. And that leaves them in the scenario where marginal revenue is different from demand. We've seen that already in our numbers. That leads them to produce at a lower quantity and a higher price. So here's the deal. If you're a consumer, you normally don't like monopolies. All right? Maybe you've gone to a football game one time and you're inside. Let's say you're going to go to a Falcons game, right? You go inside the stadium, food there is pretty expensive, right? I know they sort of made this big marketing ploy that they have prices low, but it's still a lot more expensive than it would be, at restaurants outside of the stadium. Here's the deal. Once you're inside the stadium, they got a monopoly on you. They're the only producer. So as a result, they're going to sell less and charge a higher price. You want to get a beer at a concert, it's probably going to be expensive because they are going to sell at a lower quantity and charge you a higher price because they have a monopoly over you at that point. So as a consumer, you don't like monopolies for this reason. All right, so we kind of try to draw all that together on one graph just to help you see it a little bit, but it's kind of confusing, I think, to put it all together. And again, I really recommend you read the book on that little section we just did.